place with Bill and Tom and everyone, so thank you for having me. I should just mention off the top, I'm here in a personal capacity, so what I say doesn't necessarily reflect the views of either Concordia or Libra Group. So I just wanted to say that, as I could get in trouble otherwise. I was in London on the morning that Donald Trump was elected. It was morning in London, and I opened my phone, and it's one of those things that you remember where you were on 9/11. You remember where you were, you know, if you were alive when JFK was assassinated. I remember where I was the second I knew that Donald Trump was going to be the president. And I opened my phone at 5 a.m. in my hotel room, and New York Times headline popped up, and it said, "Swing state of Nevada is called for Hillary Clinton, but her chances of winning the presidency are almost zero," or something like that. And the world has just fundamentally changed since that moment. I became a proud American citizen about a year ago, and so I'm now can talk from a citizen of America's perspective, but also as an immigrant's perspective. And I think that immigrants view America differently than people who are born there. America has always been a beacon of hope and sort of moral superiority to the world, whether you want to go there or not, whether you have ever been there or not, whether you plan on going, it's just there. It's there as a beacon. And so I think the world holds America to a higher standard, and therefore the American voter to a higher standard than other countries. You know, whoever is elected as president of the United States is also elected concurrently as essentially leader of the free world or leader of the world. And so, you know, this election of a very unconventional leader in the United States, to put it extremely mildly, caused shockwaves that we still cannot comprehend. You know, I've had the opportunity to travel over the past couple of months, and everyone is still, the word I used yesterday is bewildered how this could have happened. You know, if you get a unconventional, again, very mildly, president elected in the Philippines, which they have, that'll have a regional impact. If you have an unconventional leader elected in Peru, or not to say they have, but it's a regional impact. If you have someone elected in the United States, it has reverberations everywhere, at every corner of this globe. And that is not an exaggeration. And so I think people are just now starting to understand what that means. I think the president himself is understanding what that means. He was not a politician. He was a business person. And so, you know, it's learning on the job. You know, we are only 45 or so days into this administration. I think there are thousands of issues that they haven't yet even had a time to think about what they think of. You know, I mentioned this yesterday, I'll say it again very briefly. I was in Colombia last week. The entire Colombian peace process, which is crucial to a nation of 50 million people, essentially comes down to the implementation of it, whether the United States will give them a close to $500 million appropriation to help implement the peace process. And there are examples of this in every country in the world. And so the message is people are still bewildered, people are still comprehending this. We have never seen a president of the United States like this. And I think one thing that has been proven in the past 45 days is that President Trump, I think, this is, again, my speculation and analysis, I don't know this for a fact, but he seems very focused on keeping his word from the campaign on issues. And that's, you know, his whole sort of outsider, non-politician mantra. That is very important for him. You know, say what we will do, and then do what we have said. And I think you've seen that on most issues that he's confronted. So that can be frightening if you look at what he said on the campaign trail. But I think we'll see over the coming weeks and months what will happen. My message to anyone I meet is that you know, never bet against America. It's always a losing bet. And I continue to believe that firmly in my heart. And you know, the sun. What I said to a member of my family who was far more distraught than I was on the morning of Donald Trump's election, or the morning after, is the sun will rise again. You know, we will power through this, and you know, positivity is very important. And so, you know, we are judged by how we face difficult circumstances, and you know, turn those into positives. So that's my view of it.
Thank you. May I ask, since you were in London, and we have Brexit, and we have the special relationship between the US and the UK, how do the Brits feel about what happened there, given their Brexit vote? Are they moving away from the European Union? Is there something in the horizon towards the US? Does the Trump phenomenon help in that effort? Is it Prime Minister May was there recently?
I think it's a great question, and the United Kingdom has some very important decisions to make on how it plays the next couple of years as it relates to which sort of who it wants to enhance its relationship with, and if it wants to try and you know, really make a sort of good break from Europe, but keep good relations. There is a sort of a possibility that the government of the United Kingdom says, look, says to Donald Trump, the same thing has happened to us in the last 7 months. As you said yourself, President Trump, this is going to be Brexit plus, 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 plus. And so I personally think that would be a short-sighted strategy for the British. I also hold a British passport, so I can talk. Yeah. I think the United Kingdom needs to remain very close to Europe. It is a European country, and the United States, in the long term, will be a pro-European force that to somehow try and get close to the new American president by being anti-European in the short term might seem like something that's smart. I personally don't think it is. But again, we'll have to see what happens.
You mentioned going through the history about the first year or first couple of years of his presidency. How do you see the Trump situation the first month and a half, and the administration? That's another question, sub-question. We have a general here, but my question is, does he end up having too many generals around him, which, with all due respect to them, they're great, they're helpful, but 4 or 5 guys being generals next to him, is that like, how do you assess this? Is that?
I think every administration, we in putting this work together, we pulled in senior domestic and foreign policy makers from previous administrations. So in addition to the archival work, we actually talked to people about what this year is like. Foreign and domestic policy, legislative affairs people. Administrations naturally come in talking like they're running a campaign, and he is still doing that and will continue to do that in the first few months. What they come to realize pretty quickly is managing relations with Congress and managing relations overseas requires a different both style of communication and different rhetoric. And they are starting to learn that. I think you saw in the State of the Union or in the joint session of Congress address him starting to modulate and change the tone. It's no longer draining the swamp. It's no longer fighting the establishment. It's trying to work together with Congress. And the mention of NATO, I think you're going to start to see that diplomatically. So there are some Democrats, for instance, who worry about the malevolence of the Trump administration that he's going against, and even many Republicans that were never Trump Republicans worried about that. As one analyst put it, it's malevolence tempered by incompetence so far. That is, that they haven't put enough senior officials in key positions to follow through on things. And as they start to staff up the government, they're running into a challenge of many former Republicans who have run the federal government before, at say mid-level would be promoted to senior level, at junior level promoted to mid-level, have said that they were never Trump. So some of these people have now said they'd be willing to serve, and the Trump people have said no to them. Others might be willing to serve, and they may be able to serve. It's unclear whether they will have experienced hands who actually know how to move the levers of government. It's quite concerning to me that if there were a crisis, we talked about the Panama crisis and how that led to the effective dealing of the Berlin Wall crisis. It's concerning to me that there are not a lot of deputies yet in the government. The good news there is the career civil servants and the career military people are acting as deputies as opposed to political appointees. The great irony of this, of course, is that American democracy is now, at some level, the conduct of US foreign policy is being saved or at least managed by the military. That's the kind of thing that we often look to in Latin America for years, that democracy would be restored by the military, or was, has been the case in other less stable countries. So that's a little bit of concern. The thing that I feel good about with those set of officials that have been appointed is they have bought into something that we are starting to understand, which is the career foreign policy officials, State Department, Defense Department, CIA, believe that liberal democratic government, not just in the United States, but around the world, is in America's interest. And that does not always appear to be the case when Donald Trump himself is talking, or some of the political people around them. They don't care as much about democracy as a force in the world. I think what is really quite striking and what we're seeing is the deep state in the United States actually cares about democracy. So if that's at the State Department or at the CIA or in the military itself, they actually believe in democratic institutions. And I think that's the vibrancy of the American political system that I wouldn't bet against.
But how does it work? I mean, will there be a contrast, fight, difference, however you want to call it, between the diplomat, the guy in the bureaucracy who feels exactly the way you just mentioned, and then the line from the presidency is a little bit from the president or his staff is different? So what do? You follow the rules which go against what you think, or?
Well, I think one thing that we saw with the executive orders that got signed is how difficult it is to implement them if you don't have the bureaucracy behind you. Rudy Giuliani told us this. In Reagan's first year, they fired the air traffic controllers, okay? They had been planning on that for 4 months. And what they did was they went to every US attorney in the country. There are almost 100 US attorneys in districts across the country. And they needed to make sure that the US attorneys understood the policy that they were going to do and were prepared to take that policy to court if they were being sued by, say, a local airport or a local air traffic controller. I think they're going to come to understand that in order to get the career civil servants to do things on their behalf, they're going to have to start bringing policy back in a direction that they would appreciate. In the case of the air traffic controllers, there was great unease in the American government by most federal employees that a union responsible for the safety of the American people could strike. And many government officials who are in those positions understand that they can't go on strike, that that's not appropriate. So you had a part of the federal government that was going beyond where most civil servants felt comfortable. And I think what you're going to see is if the Trump administration has some things that are controversial, but where they have the support of civil servants, those things will happen. If they try to do things that make most civil servants uncomfortable, it will just be a lot harder to get things done. And they'll be tied up in a gridlock that they had not anticipated.
Yeah, if I could just make a recommendation to you all, if you have time, I think it's time well spent, is, I think within this White House there seems to be it's been well reported, I think it's true, a real struggle for power between, more traditional sort of conservative Republican, American thought processes and a more nationalist agenda. And there's a conference in Washington called CPAC, which happens every year, that happened last week, and Steve Bannon, who is the senior advisor to the president, and Reince Priebus, who is the chief of staff to the president, who is Greek, by the way, as I'm sure you all know, did a panel. They were interviewed together like this. And it was, to me, the most enlightening 20 minutes that I have spent understanding what the more dark forces in this White House and this this government are trying to achieve. It's, you know, Steve Bannon laid out pretty well what he saw as the goal, and there was no mincing words. And so it at least helped me. I would encourage you all, if you have a moment, to watch that, because
Can you summarize it in like?
Yeah, I mean, basically, you know, the comments that were most reported on were, he said that that this government seeks to deconstruct the administrative state of the United States. I don't precisely know what that means, but it doesn't sound good. You know, he referred to the globalist, corporatist media as the the real enemy here. You know, I'm going to misquote it, so don't hold me to it, but he said he has in the White House a war room that he seeks to implement a nationalist sort of agenda across the government from that room. And so those were the basics of it, and you know, it is widely reported. Again, I don't know for this is just what I read, that Reince Priebus is sort of the counterbalance to all those sort of tendencies.
Since you mentioned Priebus, may I ask if you feel, because there's a lot of talk about the possibility of him being next, if you know what I mean?
Departing the
Yes,
administration.
to put it diplomatically, but...
Well, I think the big challenge, if that were to happen, is whether President Trump wants to accomplish a legislative agenda or not. You know, presidents define success in all kinds of different ways, but President Trump, when he was candidate Trump, said he wanted to introduce 10 pieces of legislation. Most presidents get 1 or 2 done in their first year. LBJ and Obama got 4. If he wants to get 2, infrastructure and Obamacare, he needs the help of Congress. And the 2 most important people in his White House on delivering that are not Steve Bannon and Steve Miller. They're Reince Priebus and Mike Pence. I think if he were to get rid of Reince Priebus at this point, or Reince Pence, the 2 of them, if they were to be sidelined, it would be very, very difficult for him to get that legislative agenda. Now, he may define success in a different way. It may be what Nick said Steve Bannon wants to accomplish, which is the deconstruction of the administrative state. There, he would be just using executive authority. Well, it means things like, I think what he really has in mind there is EPA. You know, a regulatory agency on the environment and undermining its ability, the Environmental Protection Agency, undermining its ability to follow through on the domestic climate change agenda that President Obama laid out. That's one example. The Food and Drug Administration, you know, these various administrative agencies that have the ability...
Get away with it? I mean...
no, minimize its ability to actually do regulations. And in the United States, you have underlying law, and then the administrative agencies have a great amount of discretion to carry out that law. The State Department is an administrative agency. It determines national security, it determines diplomatic policy, and it is the lead agency on national security and developing a national security strategy along with, in cooperation with the White House. That is established by law, and where it's harder and harder to pass law and change law, the administrative agencies have more control. And what Steve Bannon wants to do is essentially unfund those agencies and let the private sector simply do what the private sector wants to do. Dodd-Frank is another example of that. In the wake of the financial crisis, regulation of the banking industry, rather than rewrite those laws, because it's so hard to get the laws passed, he'll just unfund the agencies responsible for carrying them out. The challenge in that is almost every one of those laws, and even those regulatory things, are quite popular in the states where Donald Trump won in his surprise victory. So what he has to do, if he's not going to win by passing legislation, if he's going to try to use the administrative state and the Steve Bannon approach, he has to figure out a way to do that to maintain his popularity in those states. And very few people understand what that play looks like.
We have just a few minutes before we expand the panel. I was wondering if somebody wants to ask any question before we go to... Is there...
Well, we have been very lucky today because we had with us an excellent analyst and some very deep inside information but also we enjoyed two diplomats. And this is to be expected, of course, from Ambassador Payet, who is a recognized career, excellent diplomat, and we're very happy to have him with us. But we've seen some excellent diplomatic skills from Mr. Logothetis. So you are worried, but you're optimistic. Would you elaborate a little further on that?
Yeah. Yes, I'm worried, but I'm also optimistic. You have to be optimistic. The day you lose your optimism is the day that things start to go wrong. I choose to believe in the institutions of American democracy. I choose to believe in the balance of powers, and I choose to believe that that America, I think the Constitution of the United States, in my limited reading of historical documents, is one of, if not the most genius, constructs in the world, and it's going to be tested. But I you have to remain optimistic. The presidency humbles everyone who is elected to it, and I think it will even humble Donald Trump. It might take a little bit longer, but I think it will happen.
It's sort of provocative as a question, but it's real. There's a lot of discussion, even before President Trump was inaugurated, that he's one of the presidents that is going to be impeached before he concludes term. I don't know what grounds on. But I would like to ask the panelists, would you feel better off with President Pence in case this happened? I mean, would you consider that a vice president would be a better president than the current president? Thank you.
The biggest challenge for a vice president who comes in, whether it's after the death of a president or in the case of Richard Nixon, the only resignation by a president, is that person's legitimacy is constitutional, but it's not political in the same way. And the one thing that Donald Trump has is some level of a vote of confidence from the American people. Steve Pence is a less known character. It's unclear if he would have authority to move forward on either domestic legislative issues or even internationally, where frankly his own views are often very different from Donald Trump's views, and they're more in line with the tradition of US foreign policy. So there is a bit of a power vacuum whenever a vice president succeeds a president. Different vice presidents have taken that moment and done different things with it. Lyndon Johnson was extraordinarily successful in the 1 year after John Kennedy's assassination, and he won a major re-election. Gerald Ford was not successful, but Gerald Ford did something really important for the country, which was to put Watergate behind it, and it ended up being the end of his own political career, but it was really good for the country. It's very hard to know. Pence is a less known character than Trump because he hasn't had that spotlight. My understanding is that he was a good governor in Indiana, but also faced some real challenges in being reelected. It was not certain that he would be reelected. He knows and understands Congress. That is a good thing for a president. That's a really good thing, and right now he's on point to do those things. I think with respect to national security issues, like I said, he hews to a more traditional approach to US foreign policy, and I think that's reassuring to a number of people, and they look to him to carry that set of issues forward.
And I'll just answer with one word: yes, I think he would be better.